Welcome to Soul and Strategy, 15 minutes quick chat today with Prajesh. Prajesh, welcome to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself around your area of work in vulnerability today?
Yeah, kia ora everybody. Thank you for having me, Kanchana. And what a great name, Soul and Strategy. So my name is Prajesh. I live in New Zealand, and I work with mindset. And one of the key things I've created or developed is something called mindfluence, which is basically how your inner thoughts and feelings and way of living affects the outer world. And the reason why we're here today is to talk about vulnerability, and that links into my mindfulness topic because you have to do a lot of inner work for your outer side to really embrace the world of vulnerability.
Amazing. Thank you, Prajesh, for introducing yourself. So, today let's dive in straight into the key question where we are going to discuss around vulnerability and the inner strength and what people often when they go through they try to build a fortress around themselves and they try to stay composed and they think that they don't need anyone and they can do it all alone themselves, but your research and your work shows that this is not true. People need to be vulnerable to live life fully and meaningfully. So tell us more around that.
Yeah, thank you. What a wonderful question to get us kicked off. My first question to you and also to your listeners is, when was the last time you were truly, honestly vulnerable? I don't just mean like, yeah, cool, I feel vulnerable today, or I'm feeling a bit not okay today. No, this is surface level. I'm asking the question is, when was the last time you truly were vulnerable, not just to yourself, but to other people? Because true vulnerability is when you're able to I'm going to use it, expose your inner feelings to maybe one or many people. And normally we go with one people, and then many people might happen later on. And the reason I say this is because when you start really looking at vulnerability, it's not about, and I love the question about looking into your heart, was the question you asked me. It's not about looking into your heart. It's going really deep because most of us don't look into our heart. What happens is you use the word fortress. So if you think about a fortress, fortress, every fortress has got a door. And when we build a fortress, we hide that door. We hide that door. The day we become vulnerable is the day that we find that door and we use our whole body weight to push that door open. But because it's a fortress, what happens is you, all your emotions, everything just comes either flooding in or flooding out. And when this happens, it's not about self-care Sunday. No. It's going to be crazy uncomfortable. Why? Because what is happening is when you have built a fortress, you're building basically a wall for survival. And being vulnerable is when you are dropping all those things that have held you in survival for a very long time. And this is why being vulnerable is really scary. And also, when you are vulnerable, it's quite exhausting.
Yeah, that's interesting and insightful as well. Tell me, what's the relationship between emotional safety and vulnerability? Because in my understanding, unless you reach a level of emotional safety, let's say with someone, you can't really be fully vulnerable.
Yeah, and this is very true. And I think this is the danger that we face because there's different levels of vulnerability. So um, if you I'm going to use the word hide, if you hide behind the fact that you need emotional stability all the time, or emotional connection to be vulnerable, you're never going to be vulnerable because you keep seeking a justification to be vulnerable. Now, let's just say, for example, the two of us have just met for the very first time. A single moment of vulnerability is when you can say to me, "Hey, Pradesh, how are you feeling?" And I can say, "Actually, I'm not feeling too well today. I've just met you, but I can be really honest." Now, if I had just hidden behind a mask of oh, I just want emotional safety, I'm going to say I'm fine, but I'm actually not well. So who am I lying to? Am I lying to you? Am I lying to me? I'm lying to me. So and I said it to you because that was a fantastic question. We all hide behind emotional safety, but there's lots of layers that we can unpack as we do that there.
Very true. In your experience with leaders or parents, men, women, how has it been? Can you share some examples when it comes to vulnerability and maybe some tips that people should follow?
Yeah, I love this. I break this down into, because I do lots of coaching and I coach, as you said, leaders, CEOs, men, women, young people, and each one of them has a different phase of vulnerability depending on the age, the experience, but also the willingness to be open. And I like to think about this as a journey, and I'm going to explain the journey in a couple of ways. So the first phase of the journey is the awareness phase. The awareness phase happens in around week 1 or 2. So this is when you start doing the vulnerability journey. What happens in this phase here is you catch yourself, as I was about to say, I'm okay. I'm not going to say this anymore because I now catch myself saying that, and I'm not going to say that because I'm lying. I'm not fine. With the awareness phase, you start noticing when you change the subject, when someone brings things that are very uncomfortable. Kanchana, in our life, people bring up some topics and we hide behind it because it's uncomfortable. But when the awareness phase comes into place, you're going to go, why am I uncomfortable? What about this topic is uncomfortable? And this is when things start changing for you. Basically, the way I like to think about it is you've been in a coma for a very long time living your life, and then you wake up and go, oh, whoa, and it's quite scary. Everything that comes through is going to hurt because it's for the very first time that you're looking at those things. So that's the first phase. The next phase is resistance. So resistance, it even feels worse than awareness because you want to stop. You've decided you want to be vulnerable, and now all these wounds are coming through. And in my coaching, people will come to me and go, "Oh, this is really hard and this is really challenging, and it's quite scary because for the very first time you're being very real." And a lot of say CEOs or directors I've worked with will say to me, this is the phrase, and I know this is when things are happening, when they go, I don't have time for this emotional stuff. That's when I know, okay, cool. Now they're on it. Or when I work with women, for example, they will say to me, I was fine before I started this. Aha, because now they've realized, oh, they've actually got a little layer. With my coaching, this is the part when most people start quitting. They quit because now it's becoming real, and because now they're actually facing their real demons. Yeah. But I just want you to realize and to listen realize is when you have the resistance, this is when you are actually trying to now really make it. Stage 3 is what I call the release phase, because what happens in the release phase is you start actually feeling the things you've avoided for years. And I'm using the word years because it's years. It's not months, it's years. This happens over years. You don't build a fortress overnight, you build it over years. Things like grief you've never processed, things like anger you swallowed. I was talking to a lady last week. She's in her 50s and she's been holding grief from the age she was 6 years old. And in one conversation, she spoke about stuff that she was truly vulnerable for the very, very first time. So try and imagine that, Kanchana, holding this grief for 47 years or 44 years, sorry, my maths is terrible. And in that one moment of vulnerability, things just started changing just a little bit. Because what happens is the very, very first time that you realize this is not going to destroy you, it just fuels it right through. And then stage number 4 is what I call the reconstruction phase. This is when you start developing a new relationship with yourself. It's all about yourself. Everything is about yourself. Now, this what happens is it's based on truth. It's about the truth you're talking about yourself, not about performance. Because what happens when you have this relationship with yourself, there's alignment that comes into place, which then changes the way you relate with other people. Why? Because you're not hiding anymore, right? You're yourself. If you can be honest with yourself, you can be honest with others. Um, and what happens then? You start finding the right people. This is what happens. So this is a bit of an example of how I've seen it play out with people I've worked with.
Amazing. And what are the tips that you would suggest to our listeners?
Yeah, great. I'll give you a couple of tips here. So the first one I would say is pretty simple. You can start this straight away, and I'm going to call it the 10-second truth practice. Basically, every single day, listen, every single day, when somebody asks how you are, pause for 10 seconds. What do you normally do when someone asks how you are? Oh, I'm fine. It's just automatic, right? But pause for 10 seconds and check in with yourself. then allow yourself to give 1 degree of more honesty than you normally would, than you're more comfortable with. So, for example, you might go, you're not going to, I'm not good. You might go, honestly, today's harder than I expected. See the difference between I'm good versus today's a bit harder than expected? It works because you're just training yourself to recognize the fact that, hey, things are not okay anymore. And it's okay for you to say that. And the cool thing about this is low stakes. It's very, very low stakes. That's one. The second one is, I think you might know this as well, is when you name the emotion. What you want to do is this is for you and yourself. So 3 times a day, pick any 3 times a day, stop and name exactly what you're feeling. So not the word stressed, the actual emotion. So, and I'm using words that are linked to vulnerability. So you might feel I'm feeling disappointed, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling inadequate, I'm grieving, I feel like an imposter. Write it down. But you don't have to think with it, just write it down, acknowledge. And why this is important is because once you start doing this here, you can't process what you can't acknowledge. So just by naming it, you're acknowledging it, and then you can start processing it. And the way you process then is either you process internally or you can seek out help from the right people. So for example, if someone writes down, I'm actually grieving, they can then seek help according to that there versus I don't know.
Yep.
And I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more. The other one that I think is really, really powerful is boundaries. Boundaries and vulnerability go really, really hand in hand. So I'd love you, for your listeners and yourself as well, is to write down 3 relationships where you have set boundaries. And for each one, ask yourself, is this a boundary that protects my energies and values? Or is it a wall that protects from being known? Two very different things. A boundary is flexible. I need space to process before we talk about this. Or a wall is rigid. I don't talk about that with anybody.
Yep.
If it's a wall, I want you to ask yourself, what am I protecting myself from right here? And is that protection and that wall actually worth it for this person here? So those are 3 little activities you can try. One of them is actually 2 are internal and 1 is external.
Amazing. That's indeed very insightful, Prajesh. While we are talking about so many things related to vulnerability, a few more questions that come to my mind, and we might exceed the 15 minutes now, but the questions are more related to modern age. What
Yeah.
do you think in terms of the stress levels? Have you gone through any research that shows a scientific research or a medical research that shows the impact of like the what's the effect of when people are vulnerable, they are willing to be more open with what they are going through, and the stress levels, the cortisol levels, or the blood pressure. Have you come across any research around that?
I haven't done any research in that myself, but I have done lots of reading and um about this area because I'm really fascinated about it. And I think what happens actually what I've read in the research is that every single one of us, every single one of us suffers from stress. Whether we like it or not, stress is part of life. And stress can either be healthy stress or unhealthy stress. Now, what happens is when you internalize the stress, especially when it comes to emotions, what happens is internally your cortisol levels are always raised. They're raised because you're always building this wall and keeping this wall built, especially if your emotional response is related to a certain person or a certain situation. So let's take it like this here. Let's use an analogy. So let's just say there's a situation or a person that has caused you some sort of emotional response that is negative. What happens is your cortisol levels are always peaked at that. The baseline is much higher than normal. Every time you see that person, every time you're in that situation, the cortisol levels, the baseline is much higher, so it peaks much higher, which is then causing more damage to you internally. Now, if you take 1 minute, one day, just to be vulnerable and go to someone that you are comfortable, or even to a peer and go, actually, I'm really not looking forward to this meeting because straight away, you're allowing yourself to reduce some of that stress, which allows you to reduce the cortisol levels slightly.
Yeah, very true. Also, in terms of the with the AI and the age of alpha generation that's coming up next. Where do you see all of this going? Like, do you think they will be able to manage vulnerability better than us?
What a wonderful question. And I have hope. I think young people are pretty amazing. We read lots of media saying that young people are blah 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 blah. But I work with some people that are the age of 15, and the level of articulation is so high. I think about myself when I'm 15, like actually I was never articulate, and I wasn't articulate with my emotions as well.
Yeah,
So I think what happens is if we just I'll reframe it in a little way. The difference between you and I, Kanchana, is that we grew up in a world where the digital world was not part of us. It came in as a disruptive technology.
yeah,
Young people now are basically born with the digital. They're born with digital stuff. So the information is there all the time. So which means they have access to a whole lot more information. However, information does a lot of information doesn't mean a good thing because it then increases comparativeness and all those joys there. But what I've noticed is there's two camps of young people. There's the camp of young people that use young people to be able to articulate and share how they feel, and the camp of young people that are afraid because they think that they're not adequate. So back to your question and back to the answer, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few years. And with AI coming into play, my biggest concern and my biggest worry, and I think you know this as well, is the latest research around AI shows that AI, number one, it decreases cognitive function, continued use, by a third. And the second thing, the most common use of AI is for companionship. So let's put this into context. If the most common use is for companionship, how vulnerable is a person going to be if they're going to be vulnerable on their ChatGPT or their Claude, or are they actually going to be? Because any of your AI tools always pep you up. Everything you're like, oh, what a wonderful idea, Prajesh. What, even if it's the most silliest idea in the whole wide world, so where are you actually going to be vulnerable? I think that is the danger
yeah.
with these AI tools because they don't take emotion into consideration.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you on that. And I think the more the younger generation, especially the teenagers, as they come more on tools like AI or ChatGPT, they are kind of becoming more vulnerable. They are kind of opening up more on those platforms, and it might be taking them in some other direction than taking them in the positive way or in the positive direction in life. So, what's your take on that when it comes to protecting their privacy or protecting their, health and mindset, growth? What do you think on those things?
What a great question. And I'm going to, in 2006, I started doing my PhD. And in my PhD, I focused on the impact of social media on young people.
Yep,
So this is Facebook started in 2004. In
yep,
2006, I was doing my research, and I found some really interesting stats because I one of the questions I asked was mental health and well-being and sexual health. And what I found is most young people are not afraid to share things online because they don't see online as a human person, but they will not share the same amount of information in human person. So fast forward now 21 years or 20 odd years into AI. And AI is very, very different to social media because AI is this thing that seems to be talking to you. And I use the word, and I can use proper language, but it is a LLM that seems to be talking to you. When actually it's all it's doing is it's just language matching. It's language matching. So a young person that is vulnerable will be sharing stuff on there, and we have no idea what the LLM is going to say to them, right? Because the LLM is just taking content from elsewhere and filling in information. So the danger now becomes is for a young person, like, sorry, I'll rephrase that. what happens is the onus now comes to us as adults, or the onus comes to the world to educate young people on what is actually real versus what is not real. What is real emotion? What is not real emotion? And I say the onus is on us because it's the onus of the young person. The young person is it's not their fault. They need to learn how to use these, how to understand what is true and false in these tools here,
Yep,
which is
that's
quite
true.
dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I also feel that where we are kind of advancing with AI, the human element there comes into picture. And that's where, because AI is not able to bridge that human element gap, so that's where being human is still important. When it comes to vulnerability and resilience. So, thank you so much, Prajesh, for such an insightful talk that we had today. And I'm sure this will leave our listeners with a deep thought around, vulnerability. And next time when they feel that they are going through challenges, it would remind them to look deep into their heart.
My
Thank you.
my pleasure. Can I just add with one close with one
Sure.
thing and with what you said before is we are human beings. So it is in our nature to be vulnerable. It's in our nature to be insert whatever. And what we have done is we've used the world or we have used stories to stop being and start doing. So I'm going to do what the world thinks as opposed to be vulnerable. I'm going to build a wall because I'm afraid of what the world is going to say. So my challenge to your listeners out there is be vulnerable. Take
Yeah.
that one small step and be vulnerable.
Very true. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prajesh, for that wisdom. And thanks for joining today. And we look forward to more such insightful sessions with you in future.